The chair will call the Education Policy meeting to order for Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. And we have a quorum present. Thank you very much. We have a quorum present, so we can begin. Members, this is our first committee hearing for 2025. Still feels strange to say 2025 for this session. We'll begin with some organizational business, including member staff introductions. So I think what we'll do is just go around the table. We'll start with members. We'll end with the vice chair and myself. So we'll start with Representative Roach. And Representative Roach, let's start this side, and then hopefully Representative DePel will be back by that time. And then we'll do staff after that. So Representative Fogelman, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Representative Marge Fogelman. I represent District 21B. Some of the school districts I represent are Worthington, Windham, St. James, Jackson, Heron Lake, Butterfield, Odin, Round Lake, Brewster. That's the main ones. I have some Christian schools also. My first time on the Education Policy Committee, so I'm looking forward to learning more about what we do. Thank you.
My name is Jimmy Gordon. I represent District 28A, which is Isani County and a small part of Chisago County as well. The school districts that we have in our area are Cambridge, Isani, North Branch, Braham, and then we've also got a Christian school in Cambridge there. So looking forward to working with all of you. Thank
you, Representative Gordon. And Representative Roach.
Hi, thanks. Happy to be here. Drew Roach, District 58B. My district covers many school districts as well. Farmington, Cannon Falls, Randolph, and a few others. So, yep.
Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Patricia Mueller out of Austin, Minnesota. This is my third term. In my district, we have Austin, Minnesota, Grand Meadow, Lyle, Southland, Moving Prairie. I also have some kiddos in Hayfield. And so we're looking forward to, I was a teacher for almost 20 years, and so and still actively teaching, and so excited to be involved in the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative DePel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry I'm late. My name is Tom DePel, and I live in Cottage Grove and represent Hastings, Cottage Grove, Denmark, and Ninninger townships. We've got two different school districts in our area, 833 and 200. And I am the board chair of a classical school in Woodbury, and looking forward to serving on the committee and serving our district well.
Thank you. And I'm Peggy Bennett. I represent District 23A, which is down in southern Minnesota. I live in Albert Lea. That is the biggest city in my district. There are, we have the Albert Lea Public Schools, Glenville Emmons, Alden Conger. In Wells, they have United South Central. And then there's the New Richland, Heartland, Ellendale, Geneva schools, as well as, I believe, 3 different private schools and a pretty strong homeschool group. So it's fun to represent that area and those school districts. I was a teacher, mostly, elementary school, mostly first grade for 33 years. Loved it. Kind of got plucked out of that to do this, start this 10 years ago. Never, ever thought I'd be doing this in a million years, but it's been a joy and a privilege, as I know it is for all of the members here. And I think I have 4 fur kids. Those of you who are on Facebook with me or see my photographs, I have 1 giant 120-pound Shiloh Shepherd, and I have 3 ragdoll cats. So, and I just want to take a moment, I guess, just as a privilege of the chair, since this is my first meeting I've ever chaired, so excuse me if I make mistakes, because I know I will. I always told my students, if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning, right? So I would like to share about this gavel that I have here, and I'm just going to use it for this opening time, but it's engraved, and this is a gavel that is engraved for my dad, Tom Bennett. He passed away a little over 5 years ago. and he was a car dealer, owned a car dealership with my uncle, then later a partner, for many, many years. Matter of fact, he and my uncle started this dealership. It was called Towsey Ford in White Bear Lake in 1956. That was 2 years before I was born. And they started with a little corner gas station in White Bear Lake with a one-car showroom and I believe 4 service stalls. And by 2006, 50 years later, they were one of the largest automobile dealers in the whole nation. So it was amazing to be with a dad like that who was successful, but also a hard worker. And when he passed away, and by the way, I want to mention his partner because my uncle passed away early on in the 80s, and Ron Glassman, my uncle's partner, took over with him, and they became very good friends. My dad actually chaired the, it would be the Minnesota Auto Dealers Association, if I can get that right, and the Greater Minnesota Auto Dealers Association, and some other chair positions. So when he passed away, I grabbed one of his gavels and I said, if I'm ever chair, I want to honor him, my first time as chair. He was an amazing man, integrity, tenacity, hard worker, kind and generous, and I want to follow in his footsteps. And so I promise you as chair and those listening as well, I will always respect you. My dad was known for that too. And I will always listen, no matter what side of the aisle or, if your position is something I would agree with or not. I'm here to listen and learn and hopefully be the best chair that I'm able and follow in my dad's footsteps. So I want to say thank you for listening to that. It kind of brings tears to my eyes. My dad was special to me, and thank you. So we've had our brief introductions. I would like to move now to our staff that we have here. And let's see, let's just start here with our LA, and then we'll go around the circle here.
My name's Isaac Pilon. I'll be the committee legislative assistant this session, and I've been with the caucus about 3 months, so happy to serve you guys this session.
Jody Withers, I'm the committee administrator for education policy as well as education finance. I've been with the House Republican Caucus since about 2011.
I'm Tim Strom from the Nonpartisan Office of House Research. This is my 42nd year that I've had the privilege to work for the Minnesota House, and I'm glad to be here with you all this year.
Glad to have you. Mr. Brennan.
Tom Brennan, House GOP Research. Been with the caucus off and on for about 4 years now.
Okay. And Ms. Para?
Thank you, Chair Bennett. Members, Christina Para from House Research. I work with Mr. Strom. Nonpartisan staff. I'm happy to work with members on any research you need, drafting bills. We'll do the bill summaries and occasionally some presentations like this, and happy to work with you all.
Okay. Did we get everybody? I believe so. Well, thank you. We have amazing staff here, so thank you so much to all those who help us get organized, who help us understand how things work, and who keep things working. So thank you so much. So members, in your folders, you have a copy of the draft of the committee rules and procedures. So I'd just like to draw your attention to a few of those items. If you want to pull that out, you're welcome to do that. First of all, meetings will begin promptly at their regularly scheduled time whenever possible. Members will need to submit a written request for a bill hearing to the committee legislative assistant and the committee administrator. When members have bills before this committee, amendments will be due by 2 p.m. the business day prior to the meeting. That's usually Mondays and Tuesdays, with testifiers and committee handouts due by 3 p.m. the same business day prior to the hearing. Members have a save file, so if you'd like to save documents for future use, please put them in that file because documents outside of that will be recycled. So I think any questions about the committee rules at all? All right, well, thank you. Members will now turn to our nonpartisan staff, House Research, to give us a general overview on the jurisdiction of this committee. There's a lot of material to cover, so we'll hopefully limit some of our questions and maybe save those for the end if possible, unless Ms. Para would rather have them, Ms. Para, sorry, along the way. What do you prefer, Ms. Para, like them along the way or at the end?
Madam Chair, I'm happy to take them along the way.
Okay. Thank you. That sounds good. All right. So members, you should have paper copies in your folders of the materials, and I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Para. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm going to start with one of the handouts in your committee. It looks like this. It says Education Policy Committee, and it's an overview of the chapters that this committee typically covers. I think this is the only subject area where there's still separate policy and finance, but especially for those of you who serve on both committees or have served on one or the other, you know there's a lot of overlap between policy and finance. The Education Code is generally chapters 120A through 129C. So I try to give you here kind of an overview of what is in each of those chapters. Starting with 120A. I did list 126C, which is education funding, which this committee typically doesn't get into a whole lot. That's more in the education finance area. So this is sort of a key if you're looking for things like discipline. That's usually in 121A, teacher licensure, 122A, et cetera. And then there's lists there of chapters that are not education policy specific, but can be relevant to the work that you do in this committee. So, for example, Chapter 13 is government data practices, and that applies to school districts and charter schools, as well as the state agencies. Chapter 13D is open meeting law because, again, school districts and charter schools have to comply with the open meeting requirements. Chapter 14 relates to rulemaking, which is something the state agencies under your jurisdiction do. So again, that's just a list of other chapters that you might be interested in because they do affect education. There's also in your packets a list of acronyms. There are a lot of acronyms in the education world. I like to think it's not as many as in the HHS world, but it still can feel like a little bit of an alphabet soup. So this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but hopefully it covers most of the acronyms that you'll hear most often. So that's just kind of a reference point. But if there's anything that you're ever like, okay, what does that mean? Please ask. Happy to talk to you about that. So we'll go into the PowerPoint. You have this in your packets, the slides as well. And they're up on the screens on either side of the room. So we'll talk about generally about the education state agencies and then some kind of offices within a couple of state agencies. The High School League, which is not exactly an agency but has some agency-like features. We'll not be talking about the actual schools, school districts, charter schools, tribal contract schools, any of that. But we'll start with the agencies. So we have the Department of Education, MDE, the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board, PELSB, the Board of School Administrators, BOSA, the Perpich Center for the Arts, and the state academies. And we'll start with the Department of Education, which is the largest agency in this area. And I have here a list of kind of some of the general duties that the department has. General supervision over public schools and public educational agencies. They adopt or amend rules under specific authority, so it's not general rulemaking authority. They only adopt or amend rules when the legislature has told the department to adopt or amend rules under a specific statute. The department also recommends changes in law and prepares a biennial education budget for the governor and the legislature. It implements the Federal Elementary and Secondary Education Act, often known as ESEA, and that's the federal law that provides what's called Title I funding to school districts. It's been reauthorized a number of times since it was first enacted. So the current reauthorization is known as ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it replaced No Child Left Behind. So when you hear ESSA or ESEA, right now those are kind of the same thing. And those where most of the federal education requirements come from, other than special ed. The department also distributes state aid and grants. It is charged with special education compliance. In special education, those requirements are largely federal. The Individual with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA, but there's also some state special education laws. And the department reports to the legislature. So those are some of the kind of major duties of the department. I'll go through some more specific ones as we go on. From time to time, the legislature adds specific offices or positions to the Department of Education, and so here's a list of some of the most recent ones. The Office of Inspector General, for example, was added in 2023, and that there were some amendments in 2024. Other recent additions were the Comprehensive School Mental Health Services Lead, the State School Librarian, Licensed School Nurse. I left off the Literacy Specialist, which is a position added to the department under the READ Act. And then the Dyslexia Specialist was added some years before that. So these are just some of examples of how the legislature has modified the department or wanted the department to add specific functions to focus on specific tasks. I'll talk a little bit now about some of the areas that the department works in and how and what their role is in areas that are under this committee's jurisdiction. So first is standards, assessments, and accountability. Academic standards and benchmarks. The department adopts standards and benchmarks in specific subject areas: language arts, math, science, social studies, physical education, arts, and then health was just added last year. Previously, local health education has traditionally been for school districts to develop and modify whenever they like. Last year, the department was required to start the process to adopt health education standards. That's a multi-year process. It'll be several years before those are finalized. So under that, through that process, they appoint a committee to look at the standards, go through several drafts, take comments from the public, and then finally goes through an administrative process with the administrative law judge. So those are the subjects where they do that. They also, and I should mention the standards and benchmarks are also reviewed on a 10-year cycle. So there's always some subject that is being revised and implemented. The state assessments are aligned to the state standards, so when state standards change, the assessments also have to change. For example, if there's new language arts standards, then the state assessment in language arts will also be updated to make sure that the assessment is aligned to those standards. The department also reports on the results of those state assessments, as well as certain other metrics or characteristics. So things like student enrollment, the characteristics of the students, whether it's by race or ethnicity, the number that qualify for free or reduced price meal or special education. And much of that information is available on the department website. They have a report card where that information is available. The next area is comprehensive achievement and civic readiness. It used to be known as World's Best Workforce. So I think of it as just Section 120B11. Under this statute, districts develop plans to meet specific goals and submit a summary of its report to the Department of Education. There's some overlap between Minnesota's state plan under ESSA, which again is that federal law that it requires states to adopt plans with their own accountability requirements. So, for example, how they'll look at proficiency in math and how they'll report on that and how they'll identify schools for improvement. So there's some overlap between 120B11 and ESSA, but generally districts develop plans to meet the goals of comprehensive achievement and civic readiness, and then they submit a summary of that to the department. So these are the goals of the state accountability system of the comprehensive achievement and civic readiness. The definition is striving to meet these goals. So it's meet school readiness goals, close academic achievement gaps, career and college readiness, graduate from high school, and this one is new, added in 2024, prepare students to be lifelong learners. So the department's role under this statute is to identify effective strategies, practices, and use of resources, and assist districts to implement them. Identify districts in the consecutive 3-year period not making sufficient progress, and the department can require a district to use up to 2% of its basic general education revenue to implement certain strategies and practices, and then to report to the legislature on districts that either have not submitted that summary of its report or that are not achieving their performance goal. And again, that's a 3-year review cycle. Next issue area is student discipline. Student discipline is governed by the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act and other discipline statutes that are in Chapter 121A. It's largely a local process, subject to those statutes, but there are some provisions for the department. For example, if a student is expelled or excluded, that student can appeal that decision to the commissioner. The commissioner's decision is then subject to judicial review, so it can be appealed to the courts. The department also collects data on exclusions and expulsions, physical assaults, and pupil withdrawals, and reasonable force used on students. And finally, the department issues lots of guidance to school boards regarding discipline policies. In the last few years, the department has had an appropriation, for example, for non-exclusionary disciplinary practices. So schools apply for grants to get training on that as well. And the department, the guidance from the department comes in various forms. It can be, sometimes it's workshops or, kind of webinars that they do for schools. They do newsletters to the superintendents, for example. So that's generally the role of the department in discipline, but ultimately those are decisions made at the local level. The department has also been charged with adopting model policies and plans in a number of areas. And sometimes the legislature will want the department to do those to be a resource to districts. If they want a district to adopt a policy, but to kind of reduce the burden on districts, sometimes the legislature will have the department adopt a model policy. That's not binding on districts, but is there as an option. Sometimes these policies are a must, so the department has to adopt a model policy on bullying, for example, and sometimes it's an option. So lead in school drinking water is a good example of a must. The Department of Education must, working with the Department of Health, develop a model plan for testing lead in school drinking water. They may adopt a model plan for radon testing, and again, that's with the Commissioner of Health. Other areas where they develop model policies or plans include harassment and violence, crisis management, and teacher evaluation. Every district has to have a teacher evaluation process, and there's some requirements and statute for that, but the department also has a model plan.
Chair Bennett, may I ask a question?
Representative DePel, go ahead.
On the model policies and plans, do you know the policy for schools in proximity to other either hazardous or toxic chemicals being built?
Madam Chair, Representative DePel, I'm sorry, I don't. Do you mean where schools can be built?
Where schools can be built, and are the regulations around that the same as residential homes or commercial?
Madam Chair, Representative DePel, there are zoning requirements that each municipality will have, and so schools will have to comply with those. So that's generally how those are determined.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Para. Representative DePel?
Is it commercial zoning or is it residential, or do you know the type of zoning that schools fall under? Or is it special school zoning?
Madam Chair, Representative DePel, I don't know. I don't know if Mr. Strom might have some thought.
Mr. Strom?
Madam Chair, Representative School.
It's hard to remember.
40 years without a switch. I'll not adjust. Madam Chair, apologies. Representative DePel. The issue of zoning is the community in which the school is located is the one responsible for that. For example, if it's in a city, the city's going to be the one establishing the zoning. And most communities, and Chelsea Griffin in our office is the expert on zoning, but most zoning has a classification for schools about where they can be and where they can't be. Generally, I would say that's not reflective of what other uses of land or what other conditions have been in there in the past. And for a number of years, this committee has faced an issue that was raised by the representatives of the Matamidi area regarding a school that was built there that was close to a site that some people thought the school shouldn't be built by. But that's a different issue than the zoning, essentially, in terms of the location of where the school can be. So in your case, Hastings or Cottage Grove may well have adopted a plan about where school buildings can go, but usually their own class as a item, not treated as residential or commercial.
Thank you, Mr. Strom. Representative DePel?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, you're welcome. Ms. Para, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. These are a few other specific duties for the department. Again, there are a number of others kind of spread throughout the education code. But one is to consult with the Tribal Nations Education Committee, also known as TNEC, to administer the Achievement and Integration Program, approve charter school authorizers, and approve or deny applications for flexible learning year programs. Okay, so I'll get into some more specific parts of the department now. One is the Regional Centers of Excellence. That's something you may hear about. It was established to assist and support school boards, districts, school sites, and charter schools in implementing research-based interventions and practices to increase students' achievement within a region, and region being, the different, I can't remember how many, 9 regions of Minnesota. These regional centers were established by the department in partnership with the Minnesota Service Cooperatives. And there are 9 service cooperatives around the state. They're joint powers organizations that are established under Section 123A21. School districts are members of service cooperatives, but cities, counties, and other government entities can also join these joint powers. They have governing boards and provide a range of programs and services, including professional development, administrative services, cooperative purchasing, et cetera. As part of these regional centers, they provide supports to districts and schools identified by the department for comprehensive support and improvement, and for targeted support and improvement. Those two kind of different levels of improvement have to do with the state ESSA plan, which again requires the department to identify schools that need some extra supports, and some of the metrics that are used to identify schools: state assessment results, graduation rates, student attendance. So based on that data, some schools get comprehensive support, some schools get targeted support on just specific areas. The regional centers are now contained within Compass, so that's more what you may be hearing about. And Compass is the collaborative Minnesota partnerships to advance student success. It's a state school improvement model that provides, it's a statewide system to provide districts and schools support in areas of literacy, math, social emotional learning, and mental health within another acronym, the MTSS, which is multi-tiered systems of support. It's a continuous improvement framework for ensuring positive social, emotional, behavioral, developmental, and academic outcomes for every student. So again, this was designed and implemented in partnership with the Minnesota Service Cooperatives. If you're interested in learning more about MTSS, there's a statute, Section 121A201, that has more information about what is contained within that. Compass provides professional development and coaching to schools through the regional staffing models based in the 9 service cooperatives. So this is a list of some of some of the staff that they have at the service cooperatives as part of Compass. So literacy leads and coaches, math leads and coaches, etc. And then the second bullet here is the areas that they provide support to districts, charter schools, and tribal contract schools in. So MTSS, family and community engagement, data and assessment, literacy, etc. And sometimes you'll see MN, MTSS, that's just Minnesota MTSS. The regional literacy networks are part of Compass, and that's they implement some of the requirements of the READ Act and provide district supports to do their part in implementing the the READ Act, and providing districts access to literacy specialists who can provide training and coaching in structured literacy, supports with implementing changes, things like literacy data collection, analysis, curriculum selection, etc. And they also provide support for planning, implementation, and evaluation of local literacy plans. Those are plans that each district has to adopt. And they were in statute before, but the READ Act made some significant changes with what has to be in those local literacy plans. That's the end of MDE. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take those and before moving on to Pellsby.
Thank you, Ms. Para. Any questions, members, before she moves on? No? Thank you. Proceed.
Pellsby is the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board. It replaced the Board of Teaching, which previously carried out teacher licensing functions with the Department of Education. In 2017, the legislature abolished Board of Teaching and centralized all the licensing functions in Pellsby. That year, the legislature also made major changes to teacher licensure, creating the tiered system that's in place today, though there have been some significant modifications since 2017. The major functions of Pellsby are teacher standards, teacher licensure, and ethics. It's governed by a board of 13 members, appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. The statute specifies who can be on the board. For example, 7 of the 13 members have to be teachers. With regard to standards, I should just mention, in 2023, the board adopted changes to the standards of effective practice, which are the standards of the teaching profession. I mentioned that one of their major functions is ethics, or teacher discipline. Pellsby adopts a code of ethics, and then receives complaints and enforces, essentially, the code of ethics. So all teachers in school districts and charter schools have to have a license. Non-public schools, teachers don't require a license. The license has to be aligned to the grade and the field, or the teacher has to have a permission from Pellsby. So as part of the discipline process, a teacher can lose their license, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently.
Chair Bennett, may I ask another question?
Representative DePel.
What were the major changes to licensure in 2023?
Ms. Para. I'm going to test your memory.
Yes. Representative Madam Chair, Representative DePel, the years blend together a little bit. So I don't think I'll be able to.
Maybe the major changes that were made over the last session in general?
I can talk a little bit. So let's see, special education, there were some major changes with regard to special education licenses in response to some notices from the United States Department of Education. With concerns regarding Tier 1, I should say, there's 4 tiers of licensure. Tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. The higher tiers, Tier 3 and 4, have longer terms and are more portable in the sense that a teacher can have a Tier 3 and Tier 4 or Tier 4 license. They can teach in any district or charter school, whereas a Tier 1 or Tier 2 license, a teacher has to apply with the district or charter school, and so then the teacher is limited to that district or charter school. If that teacher wanted to move to a different district, there would have to be a new application, whereas a teacher with a Tier 3 or 4 can kind of move anywhere. In 24, there were changes regarding teachers, special ed teachers with Tier 1 and 2. The idea being to have those special ed teachers be more Tier 3 or 4 teachers. Boy, I'm going to have to go
Were
back.
there any other policies? Teachers had to do X, Y, and Z to be licensed instead of what was done prior?
Ms. Para, I'm just, Representative DePel, so there were statutory changes to the tiers, but I'm wondering if you're maybe trying to get it, Pelsby adopted some new rules of the standards of effective practice that's been drawing some attention lately. Do you think that's?
That likely has more to do with, yes. So what items do teachers need to complete to be licensed now rather than what was engaged in prior to the last session that are new?
Ms. Para.
So I think I'll have to go back.
Yeah, Ms. Para, I think that might be good to maybe take offline a little bit because it's huge,
Yeah.
Representative DePel. And so I think to keep things moving here might be good to continue, but those are excellent questions. And as good as Ms. Para is, I don't expect her to be able to regurgitate all that information. So if you're okay
Chair
with
Bennett.
Yeah.
My question was mainly aimed at complaints that I've heard from many teachers, superintendents, and principals that there are so many mandates that they have to follow that they didn't get funding for, and there are a multitude of different things that teachers have to do now that they didn't have to do in the past, which are causing teachers to either leave the profession or leave the state to other states that may be potentially more favorable. And that was the thrust of trying to understand what those actually are.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative DePel, and thank you, Ms. Para. And we will likely have Pelsby in front of us at some point. Those will be good questions for them and be delving into a lot of those issues. But right now, during the overview, I think we'll just keep moving. But thank you, Ms.
Thank
Para.
you. I'm not trying to put you in the hot seat. I appreciate everything you've done. Thank you, Chair Bennett.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Para, go ahead and proceed. Thanks.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members, so this slide talks a little bit more about the licensure itself. Again, there's the 4 tiers. There are also field licenses, and those are the subjects. So a teacher, regardless of what tier level they are at, they also have to have a field license. So to teach math, they would need a field license in math or science, for example. They also have to, there's also a scope, so elementary school versus secondary school. Tier 3 and 4 teachers are generally teachers who have gone through traditional teacher preparation programs to get their license, and those programs can be either at the undergraduate or graduate level. And then there's also permissions. PELSB grants out-of-field permissions to allow a teacher to teach outside of their licensure field. One difference between the tier levels and the field licenses is that the requirements for the tiers are generally in statute, and the requirements for the fields are in rule. So if you're looking to figure out, what's the difference, what are the different requirements for a math teacher versus a science teacher, that's where those are. And so those are rules that PELSB adopts through the process that's set out in Chapter 14. There's also a portfolio process for teachers to get licensed through kind of an alternative route. So a candidate would submit the portfolio, and PELSB would have a group of reviewers look at the portfolio to look for evidence that the teacher met the standards of effective practice. And that process can be used both to get a Tier 3 or 4 license or to add a field to an existing license. PELSB also processes the renewal of licenses, and I'm not sure if this is one of the areas that maybe relating back to Representative DePell's concerns. The past few years, there have been some changes to renewal requirements. There have been some more additions, so things like suicide prevention, and some other topics that teachers now need to get some continuing education in before they renew their licenses. Other functions of PELSB, they approve teacher preparation program providers and the programs themselves. A teacher preparation program provider is, for example, St. Cloud would be a provider, and then St. Cloud has a number of different programs. So elementary education at St. Cloud is a different program than English as a second language. And so PELSB approves each of these programs. It has a number of rules for approving those programs, and those are generally in rule, again, rather than statute for the most part. PELSB also has what's called the STAR system, Staff Automated Reporting System, which is how districts and charter schools report the staff that they have. PELSB has a number of reports. One that you'll hear about a lot, for example, is the Teacher Supply and Demand Report, which looks at the number of teachers in the state and in each subject area and where there are shortages. It has survey data from districts and preparation program providers, so that's where there's a list of what fields, for example, STEM or special ed really is always at the top of that list of areas where there's a shortage of teachers. PELSB also manages certain grants. The legislature has assigned a number of grants to the Department of Education, but in the past few years has also put some under PELSB. So, for example, teacher mentorship and retention grants. Those are grants that go out to districts. And what's called CUGMEC, which is the Collaborative Urban Greater Minnesota Educators of Color program. And those are grants that go out to institutions of higher education for their preparation programs. They also do rulemaking, as I mentioned, some of the rules they adopt, and that, again, goes through the process under Chapter 14. That's it for PELSB, and I'll be talking now about BOSA, which is the smallest of the agencies I'll talk about today. BOSA is the Board of School Administrators. It issues licenses to superintendents, principals, special education directors, and community education directors. It's a slightly smaller board with 10 members appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, and the composition of that board is also in statute. Next is the Perpich Center for the Arts. The Purpose Center was authorized by the legislature in 1985. It is governed by a 16-member board, which is the commissioner plus 15 members appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. It has its own chapter of statutes, Chapter 129C, and it has two divisions. One is the Arts High School, and the second is, we used to call it just outreach, but it's professional development and resource support, and Purpose is located in Golden Valley. The Arts High School, it's a residential high school for grades 11 and 12. Enrollment fluctuates, so I just have here, this was the latest I could find, but there may be some, I'm sure the Purpose Center could provide you some more updated enrollment data. So in the 22-23 school year, they had 144 students, a little over half of which lived in the dorms. And there is a competitive application process to be admitted to Purpose. The professional development and resource programs, they provide technical assistance and professional development to arts educators, administrators, and other educators in the 5 arts areas of dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts. They support implementation of the arts standards statewide. They have specialists that work with school districts in planning and implementing arts education, and they do this through workshops, seminars, meetings, classroom visits. They have a conference, etc. And finally, out in Golden Valley, they also have a lending library of arts and education materials. That's free and available to all residents of Minnesota. The Purpose Center reports every January to the legislature. It's a little, I don't think we have quite that much snow right now, but that annual report lists the outreach activities that they've undertaken, the impact of those activities, enrollment trends that they're seeing, and information about students' academic achievement. And next is the state academies. The state academies is, they provide educational services to students who are deaf, blind, and hard of hearing. Many of their students also have significant physical or cognitive disabilities. It's really 2 schools, the Minnesota State Academy for the Blind and the Minnesota State Academy for the Deaf. They are in Faribault. I think it's about a mile apart from each other. They're governed by a 9-member board appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. They have dorms that have around-the-clock medical support for students during the day and after school for the students in the dorms. And they also provide consultation and support to districts statewide. A lot of districts have, they don't have quite enough students to employ certain staff full-time, so they will consult with the state academies who have more staff kind of specialized in working with these students. They serve students from early childhood to age 22. And for the very youngest, those are home-based services, and then students can move on to the early childhood or preschool classes that are on site. There's kindergarten through grade 12 programming, as well as transitions programming. And transitions programming is generally for students who receive special education services, and it kind of helps them transition to it helps with the sort of kind of career and generally preparing them for life after school. Just an overview of the students served by the state academies. They come from districts across the state. Sometimes the districts will refer the students directly to the state academies because they can provide some more of those intensive supports, and students can live on campus. So about 40% of the students do live in the dorms during the week, and then they go home over the weekend. And enrollment fluctuates year to year, but it's generally about 140 to 160 students are served there. Moving on then to the school trust lands director. Student trust lands director housed within the Department of Natural Resources. The current director is Aaron Vanderland. He's appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate. I just have a kind of a listing of some of the duties of the director, but you can see a full list in section 127A30. It's advising and providing recommendations on school trust land management policies and activities, working with the Permanent School Fund Commission on legislation to maximize long-term revenue from school trust assets, and developing and implementing long-range comprehensive strategic plans to ensure the school trust lands are managed efficiently. So that's one of just a couple of offices that are not state agencies but are part of state government and might be of interest to the committee. The second is the School Safety Center, which is a program within the Department of Public Safety's Homeland Security and Emergency Management Division. Their mission is to assist schools to prepare for, respond to, and recover from all hazard emergencies. They work with the public and non-public and tribal contract schools. They provide free resources, training, classes, facilities assessments, emergency operations, plans reviews, and collaborate with other organizations. One of the trainings they offer is school resource officer training. And again, those services are provided at no cost to schools.
Ms. Pear, I do have a question for you on this. Not sure if this would be for Mr. Strom or you, but for funding for the School Safety Center, is that a mix of federal and state funding, just federal, just state?
Madam Chair, I believe that's all state funding, but I don't know if Mr. Strom.
Mr. Strom.
Madam Chair, I think currently that's the case. I believe that there were some federal grants in the past that went to the Department of Public Safety for that purpose, but we'll check with the fiscal analyst for that committee and get back to you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks. Ms. Para, go ahead.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members, that's it for state agencies. I'll move on to the High School League, which is a little bit of a unique organization. It's a voluntary association of high schools whose governing boards have delegated their control of extracurricular activities to the league. So it's not a state agency. Schools pay dues to the league, and then the league controls contests between the high schools, establishes conferences, eligibility, determines which sports are league sanctioned. So a recent example, for example, is boys volleyball. I think that was the most recent sport to be added. From time to time, the legislature takes an interest in the decisions of the high school league, but generally in the past few years, I would say there haven't been a lot of bills relating to the high school league. The league has a number of sports, including adapted sports, but they also have other extracurriculars like robotics, speech, and music. There is a whole chapter of statutes just for the high school league. This is chapter 128C. The league is organized as a nonprofit corporation and has a 22-member governing board. 4 of those are appointed by the governor, 2 by the Minnesota Association of Secondary School Principals, and the other 16 are selected in accordance with the league's constitution. The board establishes policies and makes decisions, but the legislature has enacted some specific requirements, some areas where they have to have policies. So one is sexual harassment and violence. Another, the legislature has enacted specific requirements that apply to the league relating to concussion awareness, safety, and protection. Most recently, they required the league to provide coaches with eating disorder prevention education resources. The league, as I said, they have a number of rules regarding things like eligibility. Those, unlike a regular state agency, those are not adopted under Chapter 14, but they do have to ensure public notice of eligibility rules and policies. Like a state agency or like other public bodies, they are subject to data practices, which means a member of the public can request documents from them. And Chapter 13D also applies, which is the open meeting law, which provides they have to provide the public with notice about their meetings, agendas, etc. And finally, they report to the commissioner a financial and compliance audit that's prepared by the state auditor. They report complaints and lawsuits and certain other information. And that's the end, unless anybody has any questions.
Nice job, Ms. Para. I don't know how you do all that, and same with Mr. Strom. Members, do we have any questions at all? No, you did a good job then, Ms. Para. No questions. Well, then, members, that concludes today's agenda. Our next meeting will be our next hearing, Wednesday, January 22nd. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.